Assalamu alaikum, family. Welcome to the Sajdah channel. Today is part 2 of our series on separation, and we're going to be talking about racist planning or urban planning, as some of you may know it, and how the concept of planning was used to weaponize Black settlements during Reconstruction. Be a friend, tell a friend, and we'll be right back.
O Allah, guide me among those whom Thou hast guided aright, and preserve me among those whom Thou hast preserved, and befriend me among those whom Thou hast befriended. Bless me in whatsoever Thou dost grant me, and deliver me from the evil of what Thou hast judged. Surely Thou judgest, and none can judge against Thee, and he whom Thou befriendest is not disgraced. Blessed art Thou, O Lord, and exalted be Thee above what they set up besides Thee. I bear witness, nothing deserved to be served besides Thee, and I bear witness that Muhammad is Thy servant and apostle. Amen.
alaikum, family. We are back. Day 2 of our series on separation, and we're going to jump right into it. Today, we're going to be talking about racist planning regimes. Get your tea, get your coffee. Let's get into it, okay? Listen, this series is not for everybody. Some people, they just not feeling it, and it's okay. But for those of you who need this, who want to talk about this, I'm here for it. All right. Assalamu alaikum, conscious entrepreneurs. Welcome to the Sajdah channel. Wishing you all peace and love. Thank you for tuning in. I know you have so many things that you're doing, and I appreciate that you show love and support. I'm your host, Sajdah Wendy Muhammad. I'm an international business and real estate professional. I'm an artist, and business is my canvas. You know, I hate the way we feel compelled to define ourselves by what we've accomplished. I prefer to define myself by what I'm striving for, and that is to be a believer, to be a God. More than 1,200, Black towns. We're going to cover a few basics before we get into the subject here, okay? And we talked about this yesterday and a little bit on Sunday and Saturday. More than 1,200 historically Black towns were founded during the years of Reconstruction and at the end of the 19th century, continuing into the early 20th century. But several were established long before the Civil War. Historic Black towns, both incorporated and unincorporated, can be understood as settlements that are predominantly inhabited and governed by Black people and were established to create safe and autonomous communities amidst widespread racial discrimination and violence. From coast to coast, and in each pocket of the United States, Black entrepreneurs, farmers, and professionals broke ground in new locations throughout Florida, California, Oklahoma, Texas, and beyond. In places like Oklahoma, where there were 50 Black towns in this state alone, Black families and individuals thrived economically and politically without violent oversight and control of white supremacist culture and policies. A dramatic loss of Black towns and settlements was far from accidental. A host of systemic challenges and mechanisms of disposition have enabled the erasure of these spaces. Now, I want us to begin to think about how to prevent these tactics and others so that we won't lay out, well, let me put it this way. We're not going to lay out everything on the show, but we're going to prevent some of these tactics by just raising our awareness to them. And today we're going to be talking about racist planning regimes. Some of you all know this as urban planning, but the historical term is racist planning regimes. And what that is municipal boundary and zoning law manipulations like extraterritorial jurisdictions long impeded Black communities from accessing, all types of essential services, having political representation. And we want to review this today, how extraterritorial jurisdictions and planning tools were weaponized against Black communities. But we first have to begin with this discussion or just this presentation on the Muslim program given to us by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, point number 4 of what the Muslims want. And thank you, those of you in the chat. Thank you. Good morning, Mother. Get my notes here together. Let's begin this discussion with point number 4 of what the Muslims want. And this is what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that we should put before Congress. This is part of our reparations package, if you will. We want our people in America whose parents or grandparents are descendants from slaves to be allowed to establish a separate state or territory of their own, either on this continent or elsewhere. We believe that our former slave masters are obligated to provide such land that the area must be fertile and minerally rich. We believe that our former slave masters are obligated to maintain and supply our needs in this separate territory for the next 20 to 25 years until we are able to produce and supply our own needs. And then, in a much talked about interview, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan appeared on the Meet the Press show, April 13th, 1997, where he was interviewed by Tim Russert and David Broder. And the subject of separation came up. And here is some of the dialogue that I want to give as a prelude or an introduction to what we're talking about today. So Tim Russert, or the interviewer, said to the minister, in preparing for this interview, I read the literature that your organization puts out and publishes, and I'd like to go through it to find out what you believe and how it affects America. And then he held up the Final Call newspaper, and he said, this is your newspaper, the Final Call, which comes out once a month. And on the back page, and then the minister interrupted him and said, once a week, meaning it comes out once a week. And then Tim Russert went on and he said, once a week, on the back page is the Muslim program, what the Muslims want. And if I can go through a few of these, let me put one on the screen and get your reaction. And then he put point number 4 that I just read up on the screen. He went on to say, the first is in terms of territory. And you'll see, since we cannot get along with them in peace and equality, we believe our contributions to this land and the suffering forced upon us by white America justifies our demand for complete separation in a state or territory of our own. Is that your view in 1997? A separate state for Black Americans? And the minister beautifully answered. He said, first, the program, meaning the Muslim program, starts with number 1. That, meaning referring to point number 4, or what was up on the screen, is number 4. The first part of that program is that we want freedom, a full and complete freedom. The second is we want justice. We want equal justice under the law. And we want justice applied equally to all, regardless of race or class or color. And the third is that we want equality. We want equal membership in society with the best in civilized society. If we can get that within the political, economic, social system of America, there's no need for point number 4. But if we cannot get along in peace after giving America 400 plus years of our service and sweat and labor, then of course separation would be the solution to our race problem. Now, let me preface again with this. This concept of separation bothers a lot of people, both Black and white. Some view this concept as an extreme overreach, and many are downright afraid to even think of this subject. I want to ease you into the concept because this concept of separation was performed numerous times during Reconstruction. Except absent a protective military, had many of these towns sustained, we would be having a different conversation today. How do we avoid the repeat of history that led to the disruption or destruction of our towns? What happened and what were the signs? Now, I say this every time we talk, but I really got to put this in perspective for you all. This ain't no old school concept. Some of us may separate by being pioneers and building new towns and settlements. This historical look back that we're doing this week is for you, if you are among those people. It's for you to use as strategy when you are planning and developing. Others of us are already separated, right? We find ourselves in towns and suburbs of major cities where all the people that look like us have been left to govern ourselves. Got a lot of small towns down south and now in the suburbs of Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, where Black people are the majority and they are governing themselves. Well, guess what? This historical look back at separation is for you too, because you now quickly have to learn how to govern and to protect and improve upon what already exists. There are others of us that will be forced to separate because we just can't get our morals together. We're predators and we really got to go off and build our own predatory society and may end up governing ourselves. See, none of this works if we don't work on ourselves. And then there are some of us that are here watching the show saying, well, I like being the only Black person in my town. I like being the only Black person in my neighborhood. I pride myself on being the first Black person on this street. I like the exclusivity. It makes me feel like I've arrived. I can't live around niggas and I'm better than the average Black person. Okay, well, this is for you too. Because see, these universal principles taught to us by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad are rooted in creating a civilized society. And this should be your goal no matter where you are. And since we have all taken on the mind and behaviors of Satan in some form or another, we all must begin a self-improvement process. And we all must learn the principles of freedom, justice, and equality. I'm going to keep going because we got a lot to cover. I know some of y'all may be saying things in the chat, may have questions, but we're going to keep going. Now, the Reconstruction era in the United States history followed the American Civil War. It lasted from 1865 to 1877. And during this period, the country grappled with the challenges of reintegrating the seceded states back into the Union and determining the legal status of Black Americans. It played a critical role in the history of civil rights and racial equality in America. It brought brief progress for Black people, land ownership, political participation, and community development. Following this period, structural racism reasserted itself in land use, governance, and access to resources. Planning mechanisms like zoning, municipal incorporation, and exclusionary boundaries became tools of racial control. All right. During this period, freed people established independent communities. These settlements were often self-sufficient and resilient despite systemic hostility. Lack of infrastructure and formal political recognition, not to mention the acts of violence tantamount to terrorism, made them vulnerable and ultimately destroyed them. Now, let's talk about planning. Some of you all have taken urban planning in school. Some of you should be taking urban planning. I think it's a great major for our young people who are just starting out going to school, or anybody who wants to go back, get an undergraduate or a master's, because planning has been used as a tool of suppression in our communities for a long time. Urban planning, as we now call it today, was not neutral. It was often a tool of racial exclusion. Now, what is urban planning, you might be asking? Let me give you a definition. Urban planning is a multifaceted process that focuses on improving the quality of life for residents and promoting sustainable development in cities. It involves creating plans for land use, transportation, infrastructure, and public services with the goal of addressing challenges like affordable housing, transportation, infrastructure, and environmental concerns. Urban planners work with various stakeholders to develop and implement plans that meet the needs of both the community and the environment. We will need a considerable amount of urban planning, whether we rebuild wasted cities, whether we're building a city or separate territory from scratch, and even in towns where we now find ourselves governing ourselves, we are not exempt from the need for a deep strategic dive into urban planning. All right. Now let's discuss some key aspects of urban planning so you kind of understand what the structure of urban planning really is. All right. First, there's land use planning, or planning the use of the land. This determines how the land is used, such as, is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it industrial? Once those land uses are planned out, the area must be zoned and there must be zoning enforcement. I don't know if you've been in towns where you could have a plant right next to a house, or you got like commercial property next to residential. You see that a lot in down south. where there's like this hodgepodge of different types of land uses within one neighborhood. In bigger cities like Chicago, for example, it's pretty much zoned. You'll see residential, you'll see commercial, you'll see industrial, all kind of segregated together. That's land use planning. Then there's transportation planning as an aspect of urban planning. Designing and improving transportation systems, including roads, public transit, bike lanes. That's transportation planning. Then you have infrastructure development. That's where planning and constructing essential infrastructure like water, sewer, and energy systems. Okay. Those are usually sometimes quasi-government undertakings, which is also a interesting planning thing, because if you think of places like Flint, where the water is contaminated and nobody's really doing much about it or wasn't doing much about it, the question is, what was the infrastructure development and who is responsible? Then there's urban design, where you focus on the aesthetics and the functionality of the area, paying close attention to the environment, like are there parks, streets, public spaces, things like that. You'll see a lot of urban design elements if you move around the city of Chicago. We have a lot of parks. Our park district is really great and they're beautiful. And then we have a lot of art, street art. So that's part of urban design. Then there's environmental planning. That's where you address the environmental issues like pollution, air quality, and green space preservation. I remember after spending a certain amount of time in Beijing, we flew from Beijing to Seoul, Korea, and they told us when we got off the plane, they said, we're going to give y'all a chance to wash the china off of you, and then you can come down for dinner. What did they mean by that? Because our eyes were watering. It was all smoggy and everything. The pollution in China is really bad, or at least in Beijing. And so how do you manage that type of thing if you're governing or creating your own separate territory? Then there's community engagement. Like you want to involve residents and other stakeholders in the planning process to ensure that the plans reflect the community needs and preferences. Okay, this is going to be important. Here are some of the goals of urban planning. Okay, you want to create livable and equitable communities. You want to ensure that all residents have access to safe, affordable housing, transportation, and essential services. You want to promote economic development. You want to encourage job creation and economic growth while also addressing social equity. You want to improve quality of life by enhancing the physical, social, and environmental quality of life of the residents. And then you want to ensure sustainable development by balancing economic growth with environmental protection and social justice. That's a Cliff Notes on urban planning, you guys. So in essence, urban planning is about creating a more vibrant, sustainable, and equitable future for cities and their inhabitants. Now, when you are up from slavery, like many of our people were when they put these settlements together, and you're literally running from terrorism, it's hard to think about all these types of things, right? You're just trying to get somewhere safe to protect yourself and your family. And the powers that be at the time took advantage of our situation as well. Let me explain some of the ways in which they use urban planning, as I just explained previously, as a tactic to destroy some of these Black settlements. Again, this is for us to use for informational purposes so that we can understand urban planning as a critical tactic when it comes to governing ourselves, building our separate territories, and creating the right partnerships when we do begin to build and rebuild these wasted cities. So here's one. They refuse to annex Black communities into the existing cities. So let's take the case of Mitchellville, South Carolina. Mitchellville was established in 1862 on Hilton Head Island during the early stages of the Civil War under Union occupation. It was one of the first self-governed freed Black communities in the United States. It was named after General Ormsby Mitchell, who helped organize the town for freed people. The community featured residents were formerly enslaved Black people. They created a functioning government with elected officials. Mitchellville had its own laws, its own school system, homes, churches, all run by Black Americans. The town was a symbol of Black self-sufficiency and autonomy during and after the Civil War. But they faced resistance to annexation. So as Reconstruction gave way to Jim Crow, many Black communities faced pressure from surrounding white-controlled governments. So in the case of Mitchellville, the town was eventually dismantled or absorbed after Reconstruction, but not incorporated into any larger city or giving meaningful support. So instead of formal annexation, the community was essentially abandoned or erased by white authorities who were unwilling to integrate the successful Black town into local governance. Now, what does this mean? Some of y'all saying, well, why? Why do we care? Well, this lack of incorporation was a de facto refusal to recognize or support Black autonomy, even though it was not always formally documented as an annexation battle. So Mitchellville is emblematic of a broader pattern across the South during Reconstruction and Jim Crow, where Black settlements were kept outside city boundaries. What does that mean? That means they then were denied services like water, sewer, schools, and political representation. They were prevented from voting or running for office in the surrounding cities due to their non-incorporation. You see where I'm going with this? And they were seen as a threat to white political power and then excluded rather than embraced. Another way in which urban planning was weaponized against Black settlements was through the denial of infrastructure, like we just talked about: water, sewage, paved roads. Freedmanstown, I don't know if y'all heard of that. It's in the 4th Ward of Houston, Texas. It's an example of this type of weaponization of urban planning. Freedmanstown became a thriving, self-sufficient Black community with homes, businesses, schools, and churches. However, despite being located very near downtown Houston, city officials refused to pave the roads. Residents were left with dirt streets, while nearby white neighborhoods received paving, even though Freedmanstown's residents paid taxes. So it was almost like you were punished for living in that town. They were denied sewer and water services. The city deliberately withheld sewage and water lines for decades. Residents had to rely on wells, outhouses, and cisterns, which led to serious health and sanitation issues. Limited trash collection and street maintenance. Public sanitation services were withheld on consistent or inconsistent, I should say, resulting in unsanitary conditions. They end up paving the bricks and paving the road themselves. So in the early 1900s, Black residents took matters into their own hands and laid handmade brick streets with their own labor. Some of those bricks are still visible today. These infrastructure denials were part of a broader effort to marginalize and isolate Black communities economically and politically. Despite these challenges, Freedmanstown became a symbol of Black resilience, but over time, lack of services contributed to poverty and displacement as gentrification pressures grew. What happened in Freedmanstown was not isolated, it was systemic. Many Black settlements across the South were kept outside city limits or unincorporated, so they wouldn't qualify for basic infrastructure. These denials were strategic. They limited political power, property values, and public health in Black communities, reinforcing racial hierarchies. Here's another tool of urban planning: restrictive zoning. I know you may have heard of this. If you're in real estate, you know about it. If not, it may be new to you. Restrictive zoning is also a form of planning that was used to block economic growth and home ownership. So zoning laws institutionalized segregation in some cases. So as I mentioned earlier, zoning is a system of land use regulation used by governments, mostly local, to control how land within their jurisdiction can be used. It divides the land into different zones: residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural. It also specifies what type of buildings and activities are permitted in each area. Zoning can also regulate how high or how tall a building can be. It can regulate population density, lot sizes, things like that. All right. Now, although zoning is often presented as a neutral planning tool, it can institutionalize racial and economic segregation in several ways. And here's why, or here's how zoning can be used. Okay. Y'all all right? This is how zoning, which we're covering under the weaponization of urban planning, can and is often used and was used against Black settlements and Black towns. And it is things that if we are in leadership, we have to be mindful of. And we have to plan. Single-family zoning. Single-family zoning is something that restricts land use to detached single-family homes only. The reason why this can be used to weaponize, because it'll exclude multifamily housing like duplexes and apartments, which oftentimes tend to be more affordable. If you know anything about urban planning, if you see any of these new neighborhoods and towns pop up, a lot of times you see big, beautiful, multi-million-dollar homes, and then you'll see condos, and then under the condos, you'll see like retail areas. And the retail areas will be shops, restaurants, things like that. Generally speaking, people who are multi-family dwellers tend to be the people that will patronize your restaurants and your businesses in the area. People who live in those larger multi-family homes generally have means in which to entertain themselves on their property. So they're not going to be regular users of the community pizza parlor or the community shop, things like that. So when you put a town together, you want to have a mix of incomes, because those income mixes are often dictated by behaviors. And this is just a way that they've used it to segregate. Keeps out lower income people. If they say no, there's no multifamily, no apartments. It preserves the wealthier majority white areas from demographic change. So when you go into some of these older areas where there's old money, you see old big mansions, you won't see the ability to put in multifamily homes and things like that. Here's another one where they'll put restrictions on lot sizes and floor area requirements. This tactic sets a minimum amount of land or square footage per house. This makes it more expensive, requiring larger homes and lots. So if they put together a community and they say, well, each lot or each plot that we're selling is 2 acres. And then they may say you have a requirement to build a home that's at least 10,000 square feet. Well, that would exclude low and moderate income households from being able to live there. And they usually do that often along racial lines in some cases. Okay. Now, we may have some territories where we say this is only for Black people of a certain income level or Black people with a certain size real estate. Well, you use zoning to dictate that. There's also what they call exclusionary zoning. It's a general term for zoning laws that restrict the supply of affordable housing. Okay. So in some neighborhoods, they'll ban rental properties. They'll say you can't rent anything. They'll ban mobile homes. They'll ban subsidized housing. So you can't use a Section 8 voucher in some areas, for example, or a housing voucher. And this is often used to prevent economically diverse communities from bubbling or blending into other types of communities. I'm being careful here, but I think this makes sense to y'all. Now, in the early 20th century, zoning was explicitly used to enforce racial segregation. I'm sure now y'all get an idea of how they could do it. When racial zoning was declared unconstitutional, there was a case, Buchanan versus Worley in 1917. I'm sorry, why did I say 1972? 1917. Cities turned to economic-based zoning that indirectly maintained racial separation. So economic-based zoning is a lot of what we see, believe it or not, today. Redlining, which we talk a lot about in Chicago, where Blacks were restricted, and literally there was like a red line around the area in which Black people could live. And that area became overcrowded. They devalued it. And many of the banks and the federal government even supported this. So when it came to lending, appraisal values, if you were within those red zones, your values were less. And if you were Black, you couldn't live outside, or you would have a hard time if you moved outside of those red zones. Now, even though outright racial zoning is illegal, it lives on. Many cities still have zoning maps that mirror historical segregation patterns. The cumulative effect is that minorities and low-income families often remain concentrated in undersourced neighborhoods, while access to high-opportunity areas is limited. So when it comes to doling out resources, if the zoning is set up, if you're packaged in a certain way, then they can maybe send less resources or different resources to one particular area or another. And if you don't got a person with integrity who's passing out and distributing the resources, this can be used to segregate and create racial inequalities. So zoning shapes the physical and social layout of our cities. When used restrictively, it can entrench inequality and segregation under the guise of planning. Reforming zoning laws, such as legalizing multifamily housing or reducing lot size requirements, is a key strategy for promoting housing equity and integration. So when you are designing your city, pay close attention to lot sizes and make sure that all of this is planned out before you start selling lots. Here's another way in which planning can be weaponized, all right? By placing industrial and undesirable land uses often placed near Black communities. It's called environmental racism, and it refers to the disproportionate exposure of communities of color, especially Black, Indigenous, and low-income populations, to pollution, environmental hazards, and toxic waste due to policy decisions, zoning, and neglect. These communities are often given less political power to resist the harmful developments. They're overlooked in environmental protection efforts, targeted as sites for polluting industries due to land values and political marginalization. So when we are buying land to build on, make sure that the land is tested, whether it's be tested for radon, any kind of toxic chemicals, and that the water supply is not contaminated. Check out the zoning laws so that you don't end up building a town and then you get some big company that comes along and then poisons the land. Okay. Let's see. We got a lot of comments in the chat, but we're going to show a video. This video is an example of environmental racism. And the thing that we have to look out for when we're building separate territories, when we're rebuilding wasted towns. So when you go into these cities and you see that they're abandoned, You got to look and see, why were they abandoned? Is there something about the land, the air, the water? Is it contaminated? Is there a big chemical plant just up the street? Is that why everybody left? So all of this is research that we have to pay attention to. All right. So I want you to learn about this town and understand why this town is dying from cancer. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear this okay.
Something is here killing us. It's a terrible thing to watch people die of cancer and realize the suffering that they're going through, and to realize that you could be next. Welcome to Reserve, Louisiana. This is the cancer capital of the United States. But we know that people in this little town is suffering at a cancer rate that's 700 to 800 times that of the nation.
We're in what's known as Cancer Alley in Louisiana, an area between New Orleans and Baton Rouge lined with petrochemical plants and refineries. Most of the towns here are poor and Black with extremely high rates of sickness and suffering. Robert Taylor has lived here all his life, and he's surprised he's made it to the age of 77.
And my mother got cancer. My brother died of lung cancer. My sister's son died of lung cancer. My wife got it, my daughter. When it wasn't close relatives, it was the next door neighbor and the people down the street.
He's currently in a legal battle against a large chemical plant a few blocks from his house. It's the only plant in the U.S. which makes chloroprene, a chemical the EPA says is a likely carcinogen.
I think the emissions need to stop. I don't think that human life should be subject to the profit motive.
What chloroprene goes to make is a neoprene material that goes in wetsuits and laptop covers. It's more of a product that's made for people's recreation.
Well, that's a part of the humiliation that we suffer. We don't even have a swimming pool in the Black community. The predatory attitude that the powers that be have toward Black people has not changed since slavery. The methodologies and whatnot changed, but the effect in all of this is still the same. We're still deep in slavery in America.
Reserve was once a thriving Black community post-World War II. Robert's parents and many others were drawn to work in the large sugar refinery or farming the surrounding sugarcane fields. The sugar company closed in 1985, and now petrochemical companies have bought out much of the town because of its proximity to the Mississippi River, highways, and railroads. All that's left of Robert's childhood neighborhood now is this cemetery, which is ironically filled with Robert's relatives who mostly died of cancers linked to the emissions.
All of our ancestors here now are covered by this monstrosity here.
So you have to visit from here?
I had to either visit from here or I can't go on that property I can't even walk across now to go into the cemetery.
This is the cemetery. Across the tracks, this is where I was standing with Robert. Petrochemical companies own all of the surrounding land.
My mom and my dad in there, brothers and sisters, uncles, aunts, my grandfather. But look what I've got to go through. Look what I'm up against, just trying to come and visit with them.
Robert teamed up with Wilma Suba, a chemist who is doing pro bono scientific analysis for the community. They hold regular meetings to fill the town in on what's going on.
Everyone's been exposed for a very, very long time. DuPont has been making chloroprene here in LaPlace Reserve area for 49 years and releasing it into the air.
DuPont operated the plant until Dinka took it over in 2015, keeping on almost all of the facility's employees.
This is the only community exposed to chloroprene at these high concentrations in the whole United States.
Chloroprene is released into the air during its production process. It can't be seen, but does give off a pungent smell. The chemical enters the body when it's breathed in, ingested, or absorbed through the skin, and is linked to liver, kidney, and digestive cancers, as well as leukemia, heart and reproductive problems.
So in your opinion, is it undeniable that it's linked?
Yes, it is totally undeniable that the link is there, yes. We have the Fifth Ward School right there with the lower elementary being really, really exposed.
This school is a big point of contention. Robert went to school here in the late 50s, early 60s during segregation. It's still a majority Black school today. The school has levels of chloroprene that are 400 times higher than what the EPA says is safe to breathe.
A large percentage of these students live right here as well. So they're being bombarded. These kids are being bombarded with that, some of them 24 hours a day.
How far away is this elementary school from the plant?
1,500 feet.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So it's just right beyond
Right,
those trees,
yes, right beyond those trees. Those trees right there is the plant. People most affected by the negative aspects of it are the poor and the powerless, which in America, by and far, are the people of color, or Black people. From what I get from them since I've been involved is just a sense of helplessness, powerlessness. How can we fight these powerful, rich organizations? Once we can get enough people to join with us, that's where our power will be. You know, we'll exercise political power. That's where our hope lies in.
Whew, so sad. So sad. Praying for each and every one of them. This is the type of predatory behavior that we must weed out as leaders. We must understand city planning or urban planning. I worked with a company that builds cities in West Africa and learned the importance of city planning. It is critically important because it shapes how people live, work, move, and interact in urban environments. Good planning creates cities that are healthy, inclusive, sustainable, and efficient, while poor planning can lead to congestion, segregation, pollution, and inequality. Poor city planning can lead to poor transportation and logistics, traffic congestion, environmental degradation, housing crisis, poor access to essential services, the loss of culture and historical identity, and more. It's very important that as we move into this segment of our development as a people, that we focus on self-improvement. We have to make sure that we get rid of the trauma from the isms that we faced so that we are not hurt people that hurt people. And we're not selling out our community for a few dollars. See, a lot of us get into office because we think it's a way to get the contracts and stuff like that. That's not the kind of leadership that we need in our new territories, our newly governed territories, or even where we're rebuilding wasted cities. All right. So tune in tomorrow. Let me tell you what we're going to cover tomorrow morning on this series. Tomorrow morning we're going to be talking about forced sales and land laws. I know almost every Black person I know can tell a story about their family that had a house, had some land or something like that down south that was taken from them. And so we're going to talk about how that tactic was used to uproot us and could potentially be weaponized against us if we don't properly plan and protect ourselves as we begin to separate and build. We do not want to be the brainwashed that are now the brainwashers. All right, let's see. Couple things I got to announce to you guys. Sunday is the last day in the series of our money psychology series. We're going to take a deep dive into mindset. That's how we're going to close the series out. That's 7 p.m. You can use this QR code right here to register. It's only $25. I'm telling you, it's going to be very worth it. A lot of people bought the whole series, and some of you all are here in the chat, and it has been life-changing. We have really been blessed during this particular series. Also, if you're a Muslim in business, we are going to have a mixer and ice cream social on June 26th at the Elijah Muhammad House. That's at 6 p.m. So if you want you some good old Sean Michelle's homemade ice cream and you want to meet and network with like-minded professionals, you can do that then. All right. And don't forget, we are still working to complete the former home of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So make a donation, get your coin if you haven't already gotten it. Go to the website, ElijahMuhammadHouse.com. Some of y'all remember it as SajdahHouse.com. Same thing. Go to the website, make a donation. We continue to need your support because while working and sharing information with you, I'm also working to complete the home and get us to the point where we can get open and you can come there every day for tours. So become a sponsor. If you want to be a sponsor, just send an email to sajdahhouse@gmail.com and put the word sponsor in the subject line, and I'll send you some information on how you can become a sponsor. If you want to sponsor one of our upcoming events, like the networking social that's coming up, do the same thing. And then just tell me in the body of the email, hey, I want to sponsor the house, or hey, I want to sponsor the networking mixer. And we've got some other great programming that we're going to be doing coming up really soon. So just stay tuned. Okay. And we'll see you all, inshallah, tomorrow morning. And we're going to talk about land loss as a tool that was used historically to destroy Black settlements during the Reconstruction era. All right, family. Remember, it's not personal, it's vibrational. I'll see you all, inshallah, tomorrow morning. Make it a great day.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who in my judgment is the master historian, taught us that of all our studies, history is the most attractive, and it is best qualified to reward the researcher. History is most attractive. Why should history be most attractive? Because history is the recorded time of the human family in its struggle to overcome obstacles. There is no life that is without struggle. The Holy Quran teaches us that man, meaning man and woman, is made to face difficulties. And after difficulty comes ease. But it is history that guides us through difficulty. For if you know how people who had difficulty yesterday got through, and if your difficulty is somewhat similar, then today we also can get through if we follow the guidance of history. This is why Carter G. Woodson and many of our black giants fought for black people to know our history. Because in not knowing our history, we don't have a guide. And without a guide, we are lost. No wonder the Bible